Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. After this brief announcement from the principal's office. Hey, this is your host, Alec Mohibian, with a quick message before we continue. Based in that great but very troubled place, Hollywood, California, Filthy Armenian Adventures is an interdimensional travel program that takes you deep into the cultural mysteries of our time. In search of truth, in search of gold, in search of lost friends and unsung heroes, in search of John Galt's motor. This show is your antidote to the black pill. This is your guide to the places, the personalities, the ideas and creations the enemies of man don't want you to know. This is your techno-noir investigation into the good, the evil, and the God hiding under our noise. This is where you get the news before it breaks, before it blows, before it burns. The show is supported entirely by patrons at patreon.com/filthyarmenian. As a patron, you get access to twice as many adventures, including the most important ones, the ones with the real facts. Plus, regular brief smoke break spiritual reports on topics of the day. As a patron, you also get exclusive access to our Smash live events. Ask anyone who's attended one, and they will tell you it's an experience you'll never forget. It's very easy to keep Filthy Armenian Adventures alive. You can still listen to the show on your favorite app like Spotify or Apple, and you can do so with the pride that you're putting a little bit of money where your soul is. More patrons means more fuel, more topics, more investigations, more miracles, more secret locations, and forbidden territories around the world, and the world that is Los Angeles, our post-apocalyptic headquarters. It means we'll be able to track down more enchanting figures in the landscape, dare them to abandon their masks, and join our quest out of the darkness and into a golden age. Patreon.com/filthyarmenian. Thank you for being one of the good ones, and enjoy the show.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. I have like groups, so you do just like a 4-step thing, and then.
He's a hot teacher. I am now at Paul Revere Middle School, a 26-acre campus that sits between Sunset Boulevard and Allenford Drive. And I got here by a very circuitous route in the logic of filthy Armenian adventures, where it took Mulholland Drive west, west, west until it became the dirt road. And the dirt road eventually meets Mandeville Canyon. And if you take Mandeville Canyon Drive 5 miles down from the top of where it meets Mulholland, you'll arrive at Sunset Boulevard, right at the playing field of Paul Revere Middle School. And I'm looking right now at a mural that's on the wall that seems to be celebrating trans, male, female, bigender, hetero, agender, bi, analog. There's something else. Anoragi, something. It's blanked out. WLW, MLM. And let's take a picture of this. Love wins is the slogan of this mural. And it reminds me that in my day at this school, out of 2,500 kids, 3,000, 2,500, whatever kids, there was exactly one loud and proud gay boy. Exactly one. It was the first I'd ever seen. He was super, super flamboyant. I forget his name, but it was absolutely impressive how unabashedly flamboyant he was. And of course, kids made fun of him left and right, but at a certain point, it stops mattering. He just didn't care. I also had a gay teacher in 6th grade. It was my first encounter with adult homosexuality. It was my Simpsons episode with what's his name? What's the character's name played by you-know-who? The teacher's name was Mr. Carnine. He was like 29 years old, Chinese American, Cantonese, like old school Chinese, fussy, fastidious, severe. He was a bossy bottom extraordinaire, strict and demanding and easily annoyed. And I'll never forget how much a particular woman who I had as an elective teacher in 6th grade, I forget her name, how much she admired Mr. Carnine's handwriting. She would just moon over his handwriting. She would talk about it all the time. I mean, she was in love with this man's handwriting. And especially how he was able to do it on a chalkboard. He did have impressively clear cursive handwriting. Back when cursive was still a thing. So that was the mural I had. It was just a gay boy whose name I forget, and it was Mr. Carnine. So first things first. This is called Paul Revere Middle School. It was established in 1955. And for the longest time, it was called Paul Revere Junior High. And when I came here, it was painted Paul Revere Junior High on the walls. They've since corrected that. It was painted Paul Revere Junior High, but it had already been changed to Paul Revere Middle School. At some point, the pedagogical winds had shifted from calling this, at least in California, at least at LAUSD, had shifted from calling this place this kind of school, junior high to middle school. And I have to say that I agree with that shift. This is middle school. This is a middle. This was a smoggy middle. This wasn't just like a dress rehearsal for high school. This was its own smoggy, confused, knotted middle, Malcolm in the Middle thing, this passage. so smoggy, so knotted, so confused that I forget even how beautiful this campus was. Although, of course, back then, things were smoggier in LA. In my mind, this campus was far dustier than it actually is. It's beautiful. It's like a country club. Greenery everywhere. It's a long 26-acre campus. Very, very, very large for middle school. And for a long time, I didn't reflect too much on my time here, because even though I am a reflective person, even though I am constantly thinking about the past, this was a part of the past that I preferred not to think of for quite some time, because it was like you just wanted to flush it. It was that kind of, didn't know who I was yet. And the passions that I obsessed over in this part of my life were soon to be no longer the passions that would define my life. And apart from one or two personalities that I encountered during these years, I kind of put this away as a dark period that isn't meant to be mined all too much. But the truth is that the fundamental transformations and even transfigurations occur earlier than we think. The entire industry of therapy is founded on that particular knowledge. It's what makes it so lucrative. You can constantly dig, and always find something from earlier than you expected. And as Bob Dylan said, the therapist is on the wrong side of that transaction. He should be paying you for all that gold. So I ain't about to be fooled. After all, this is where I began selling sports cards out of my backpack. I was buying the boxes from the trade show, Frankensons, in Walnut, City of Industry, and selling the packs to my friends for less than they could get them from the store, from the retail store. And that's how my business began. That sort of began in 6th grade, 7th grade-ish. It really kind of sprouted in 7th grade. And even though I will talk about that business because it's an interesting world unto itself, the trading card business, I will talk about that in its own adventure, in its own episode, because there's much to talk about there. The fact is that it was a transformation. It was something that happened here, and it was a way of grounding me into a far more attainable reality than the one in which I hoped to become an NBA star. Just didn't have the talent for being an NBA star, and it's a very hard thing for kids to accept when that is the only thing they've ever dreamed of being. And at a certain point, you have to puncture that illusion and replace it with something with a mixture with a little bit of a higher reality quotient. And if you think about it, there couldn't have been a more natural one to replace it with than to be the buyer and seller and wheeler and dealer of NBA talent that one does not oneself possess. And that happened here. And it's notable to consider that Paul Revere, after whom this school is named, was himself an engraver and a silversmith before his transformation. he said to his friend, "If the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light. 1 if by land, and 2 if by sea. And I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm."
Sixth grade was the reality year, the first dose of reality year in my particular life. Coming to this giant school where the majority of the population was bussed in from the inner city, and I would get to know them quite well, and I would get to know their inner city somewhat well in the years I spent here. But more than that technicality, this was also the year where more painful truths of the human experience became manifest. I mentioned in the very first part of the tour, my friends from 5th grade and 4th grade, Kevin, Matt went to a different middle school, and Kevin, we sort of drifted apart in 6th grade, and that was a quietly painful thing for me. It sort of, there was that inevitable conversation about how this is a new world and you got to make new friends and be girls. You mentioned girls. He had a crush on this girl named Samantha, as I recall. Samantha Power? No, that's the bitch in the Obama administration. Samantha something else. Jewish girl. I remember that early initial, like, we should expand our horizons conversation, and that was the first time that had ever happened in my particular life. So this was a new world. I was in a new world, and it was much more like the real world than any I had ever been in before. Demographically and metaphysically and in every other way. And nowhere was that more evident than on the basketball team, where I not only was playing with kids from the inner city, but I had a coach from the inner city who would drive in here from Compton every morning in a 68 beaten up green Volkswagen Bug with a giant bullet hole in the windshield. His name was Leonard Owens, and he was the custodian of the school. And just as an air bud, he was also the basketball coach. And his first words to me, were something on the order of, "What are you doing, you fucking retard? Asshole," something. It was nowhere near as colorful as what he would scream to the black kids, of course. A language that in the age of hip-hop did not seem as radical as perhaps it may seem now, but nevertheless was absolutely unrestricted, uncensored, and full of ends, and creative. I remember him calling this one fatter, more heavier kid, watermelon bucket head, watermelon head. Look at you shaking your big watermelon. Leonard Owens was a real hard ass. And that was a dose of reality that would come to define the rest of my life.
Beneath, in the churchyard, lay the dead, in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear, like a sentinel's tread, the watchful night wind, as it went creeping along from tent to tent and seeming to whisper, "All is well." A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour, and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. For suddenly all his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide, like a bridge of boats.
I'm standing in the lunch area right now, where new friends were made, eventually, with the help of the basketball team, primarily. I became casual friends with the kids on the basketball team, but I became close friends with one of them, Dylan, a feisty ginger, very good player, left-handed, southpaw. Dylan was kind of a coach's favorite on the basketball team. He's the one that the coach would never, ever tear down, ever. A man who sought every opportunity to throw daggers, including at the best players. Dylan wasn't the best player we had. He was simply, a good player. And there was something about him that Coach Owens, really fucking liked. He never demeaned him, ever. He only ever complimented him, ever. And Dylan would be one of the few kids who stayed on the team from 6th grade to 8th grade for most of the time. As far as I know, there were 3 who did that. It was Dylan, Obai, who was the best player by the end of it, Persian kid. He got game, he was good, and there was me. And we were the only 3 who stayed on from beginning to end. Everybody else fell off. Everybody else fell off that wagon. All the black kids fell off that wagon. All of them. At the end, there wasn't a single black kid on the team, as I recall. Jeffrey, Leon, they all fell off. All of them fell off that wagon. They couldn't handle it. Black kids could not handle it, starting with my or the year after class. The 8th graders, when I got here, there was a lot of black kids on the 8th grade team. They could handle it. But the black kids got softer somehow in just a couple of years. And so they couldn't handle it. They all fell off. Of course, the white kids all fell off except for us. They couldn't handle it either. Because the thing about Leonard Owens was he wasn't just a hard ass. He actually understood the game. He was a knowledgeable person to a degree that commanded respect by all the grown-ups, including my dad, including all the teachers who would scrimmage against us on Wednesdays at lunch. In the gym up here, he commanded this respect. And he was like in his late 20s. There was word that he was once drafted to play in the NBA, but then his career was shattered by a horrible knee injury. He had a bad knee. And there's something that kept me on here. Wanting to satisfy and aspire to be good enough to win the praise and approval of an authority who knew his shit. But that did not appeal to very many others. We had the wigger fell off. I mean, we had a vintage, real deal wigger point guard. I think it was in 7th grade, named Mikey. I think. And he had like a high-pitched, squeaky voice. I mean, he was thoroughly, unself-consciously, 100% a full-blown, like he couldn't be anything else. Like maybe he'd have to like move to England and like date some like English fucking libtard for like 10 years to stop being a wigger. He was in his bones. He was like a little M&M all the way through. I've never seen the real deal. They said every art fag in New York calls themselves a wigger. None of them says a wigger. This guy's a wigger. This is a wigger. This is a wigger. Mikey. But even he couldn't handle, I don't even know what happened to him, but he was there for like a year. It was only 3 of us that stuck it out from beginning to end with Leonard Owens on the middle school basketball team called the Rough Riders. And I'll get back to Leonard Owens in a bit because he was a very important man in the story of Paul Revere. I was once seen dropping my lunch bag, sealed fully, of course, into the trash for five beats of a second, and then I reached in to whip it out, to fish it out immediately. And the Topanga kids, Dylan was in the part of a Topanga crew. The Topanga kids saw me, and from that point on, for the rest of my time here, I was referred to as Trash Digger. Trash Digger, mind you. And I was and it went to high school. They tried to keep it going into high school, like an improv exercise that'll make you want to commit mass murder. And one of them did go on to be a UCB house player, by the way. Dylan, the other Dylan. So, but it was fun, There was other grown-up bribes happening here. This was reality had its bribes. It wasn't all just rough emotional epiphanies and the crack of the whip. It was also Domino's at lunch and Pizza Hut on alternating days. You could get the personal pan pizza if it was Pizza Hut. You could get a slice of very cheesy Domino's if it was Domino's. I've previously mentioned exactly how cheesy they made it at the Domino's in Palisades, where they must have ordered they must have supplied the pizzas for our lunch. Extremely cheesy, very satisfying, thoroughly a heavenly part of being a kid, eating that pizza. You're a child abuser if you deprive your kids of pizza. And that was available Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I think the personal pan pizza was Tuesday, Thursday, or alternating, or whatever. Every day we had that. And then, there was also Subway. There was a Subway on several days a week as well. Cold cut trio, turkey, or I forget the third option. I would get the cold cut trio. They didn't have roast beef, which pissed me off. I wanted roast beef option. Didn't have that. So it was like, maybe the third one was veggie. I don't know. But I would get cold cut trio. Maybe I would sometimes get turkey. So Subway, Pizza Hut, Domino's, these were the bribes. There was a general store. There is a general store still. I see it now. And from there you could buy candy for a very affordable amount. 50 cents for a Snickers bar, a whole Snickers bar. There was popcorn as well for $0.25. But the candy for 50 cents, chips were available. Soda, the vending machines were out and you could get soda, Cokes. So all these things that were absolutely forbidden from your casual reach in up to this point were for the first time available. That part of moving into this part of life was dazzling and wonderful. It was wonderful having just free fucking reign, and it was, money was not an option for that stuff for me ever, but especially once I started selling the cards. Boy, could I was living large on that shit. At a certain point, I would sell candy too when I would do the card shows, and anyway, that's another story. I was buying shit up. I mean, I never was at a want for soda or pizza because you just spend your lunch money. It was like $1, whatever, $1.50 to $3, whatever. Wonderful. Cookies. They had cookies that were really good. That was during nutrition. It was called nutrition now, no longer recess. And our nutrition was chocolate chip cookies. For 50 cents or 25 cents, probably only 25 cents. So there were immediate bribes offered by reality. Not bribes, but they're just the rewards of reality. This is what happens in the real world. In the real world, people start having boners. People separate. Demands can be extreme and expressed in ways that have no regard for your sensitivities and no regard for your soft spots. But in the real world, desires can be satisfied. The real world has rewards as well. You get rewarded for being a grown-up. You can fuck all the Mars bars you want, if you can afford them. So these are manifest. Now, before I get into the kind of the larger point, I just want to remember some things about this place that I haven't really thought about that much. I mean, in a certain sense, in those days, and I came here between 96 and 99, those 3 years, or whatever, I guess it's dipping into, how it works. In those years, it was still, in many ways, I remember distinctly, homeroom, this was a homeroom, by the way, there was a homeroom where you'd go for 10 minutes. I don't know what the concept was exactly. It was just to basically take roll, I guess, on a different level. I guess it was because for the first time you had different teachers as well for different subjects. Up to this point, we had one teacher for everything. Now you have different teachers for specialization, it's called. So we had this was the first time I had different teachers, as one does in the real world. Different experts, if you will. In 6th grade, they were still pseudo-combined. The math and science was one teacher, Mr. Hernandez, who I liked. Basketball lover of Cuban background. I don't know if he came from Miami or not, but he was, he had like a lisp. He was very white type of, but very into basketball. Drove a pickup truck, would get a patty melt at Denny's, would talk about his dates and his girlfriend, and would always talk about would always razz us boys in the class about our skills in courtship. He was always being a guy's guy, a very young unk. Loved Mr. Hernandez. I wish he was still here. I was kind of hoping he was, but I couldn't find his name in the mailboxes. So we had him, straight guy, for math and science, and of course we had gay Mr. Carnine for history and language arts. And Mr. Hernandez, he was good, kind of like a numbers whiz and stuff, and he was also very, very intimidated by parents. He was very nervous anytime a parent showed up, even just to bring donuts, like my birthday. Very nervous about parents. I don't know why. I guess, maybe he felt, maybe just a young enough teacher that he feared their complaints. I don't know, but he was so nervous, he was the kind of nervous around parents that kids are around the teachers when they see them in the wild, in real life. Like when you saw your teacher at the grocery store and it was like a celebrity. It's like you're seeing a celebrity at the grocery store. That's how he was around parents. Very interesting. But I was too young to make any kind of fucking heads or tails out of that. Obviously. It was something my dad pointed out. But Mr. Hernandez, the one thing I remember learning in Mr. Hernandez's class was the concept and the word plagiarism. And he taught me that concept privately when explaining how it came to be that Bobek, a Persian Jewish kid, turned in a few days after my science project on the radio football helmet the quarterback's NFL helmet, where they can, through a radio signal at the time, and it's still now, call in the plays. That was my science project. And a few days later, coincidentally, Bobek did his science project on the very, very same thing. And I was obviously annoyed by this. And I was like, visibly annoyed and not wanting to create any ridiculous academic dramas at so early a part in everyone's life. Mr. Hernandez at some point just told me confidingly, it's called plagiarism. That's what he did. It's called plagiarism. He was just explaining it in this, like, forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. I learned about plagiarism in that class. And then I didn't know the word for it yet, or the phrase for it yet. But in history or language arts, whichever, I think it was language arts, whichever, the same fucking thing. Language arts. I wish they kept that throughout, you know. I'm a language artist. Of course, I did get my easiest grades, best grades in language arts. Always. Easy. Spelling, all that shit. We did at some point in language arts, I learned, well, I'll tell you what happened. There was this project. We were going to illustrate, it was one of those arts and crafts projects which I've always hated. Hate. And despite how much I loved the teacher who really excelled at them, Miss Petrick, I still never, anything involving glue and scissors, count me out. Include me out, as Louis B. Mayer used to say. But anyway, there was such a project in language arts, bullshit thing. We were supposed to illustrate a scene from whatever. We were supposed to make a poster using colored construction paper and glue of an illustrated scene from Greek mythology. That was the thing we went over, but in that sixth grade class was Greek mythology. I'm remembering now only for the first time because I remember the poster. And the poster was something with King Triton, blah, 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 not whatever design. And I was teamed up with a kid named Knek. Now, Knek would later on become a out-and-out communist and ideological rival in high school. But this was not known at the time, at least not to me, and I don't think to him in sixth grade. How could he know he was a communist when he didn't even know on the basketball team, in the middle of a game, on multiple occasions, which basket he should be shooting at? He shot and scored, if I remember correctly, at the wrong basket multiple times. Actually, I take that back. I don't think he ever once scored when shooting at the wrong basket, which is how you know that he was truly, deep down, a communist. Another way you can know is that I selected all the colors for this design. It was like an outline, right? I selected how each little, and there's a lot of little crevices, and a lot of little sections, and a lot of things. I selected, a pretty radical palette of colors that were then going to be applied via construction paper to this fucking poster that I can't believe we have to waste our time on. And Knek being better at with his hands and with arts and crafts shit, because he's fucking communist, he ended up doing all that. The cutting and the pasting. I chose the colors. It turned out beautiful. Because the colors I had chosen, my God, you should have seen it. There was purple in there. You would have thought nobody would ever put purple in, would never make a King Triton's, whatever, the fishtail thing, but purple. Oh, buddy, it looked gorgeous. There was gold, there was blue. I don't remember how the whole thing, who cares? The point is, it looked great at the end of it. But Knek was real sore that I made him do, that he had to do, because I didn't know how to do, most of the cutting and pasting. And he thought this was not a fair collaboration, that I merely selected the colors that made it beautiful, and he applied them. And I got an A on the back of his proletariat little fucking arts and craft fingers. And in retrospect, that was a very interesting lesson about the labor theory of value. Anyway, so that's something I learned in language arts. There's another moment in language. I'm trying to, the little things that pop up. Like, why do they pop up? Why is it that I'm hearing Mr. Carnine tell us that at his Thanksgiving, his mom makes, in addition to all the traditional stuff, his mom also makes lobster Cantonese. What does lobster Cantonese have to do with Thanksgiving? Nothing. But we make it. We decide to make it. He did, did that kind of thing. He did that kind of thing. I remember that for some reason. Possibly because the idea of having a dish full of lobster Cantonese at my Thanksgiving sounds mighty nice to me. Bring it on. Bring on the lobster Cantonese. Another point I remember Mr. Carnine, I remind you, he's the gay, fastidious, fussy language arts teacher with excellent handwriting. On another occasion, I remember him saying, I hope God is a woman, and that she's black, and that she's Jewish. So I remember learning about that religious theory from him. And what else do I remember from him? Little specific moments. I remember him talking about how he leaves his wallet at home when he goes on a walk in Venice Beach, because apparently he was living in Venice in some apartment. You can imagine the single gay life of a Chinese, skinny, fit, a personality, Mr. Carnine, that I have since recognized in other gay teachers who are in middle school, and I got to say, I approve of that, because they took their jobs. He would dress well, actually. He had black jeans or like black trousers, depending. And from the black jeans, his casual fit, he would have his keys connected by chain. Remember when people would do that? I mean, the janitor did it. No one did that because it was janitor. But like, remember that normal people sometimes did that? Especially teachers. They had a chain connecting their keys to their jeans. You don't see much of that anymore. So he was always looking good and took his job very seriously. And I'll never forget the time he said he was promoting the madrigal, the band. There was all this to-do was made about what a great music teacher the school had. He was one of those old timers he was just like you see in The Simpsons. Everything about this place there was a lot of Simpsons about this place, including the music teacher who'd been there forever with the beard and looks like a Soviet composer, including the woodshop teacher whose name escapes me, but who had not missed a day of class in 35 years or 40 years. Maybe it was 37. He literally told us this. He looked like the image of youth. Virile, beautiful hair, white hair, just like Mr. I forget his name. He has to be very old by now, if he's alive. Hadn't missed a day of class, a day of work in 35, 40 years. And so there was some belief in the system going on and being perpetuated here at Paul Revere, where the yearbook, my 8th grade yearbook was called, or all the yearbooks were called Patriot. The graduates were it was Patriot, the Patriot yearbook. The school newspaper was called the Town Crier. There was this and I'll never forget him talking about how good the music teacher is and how their next performance was going to be. And he was saying, I will be going on Friday night. And he made it seem in that promotion, that advertisement of the school music show, of the school like symphony show or whatever, which of course only a fucking parent would ever go to in a million years. He made it seem like an important adult nightlife event in the way he talked about it. There was absolutely no equivocation or, there's a certain that seriousness about the job of being a teacher is something that I've detected in others as well, and I like it. I think it's very valuable, and people who have it, I think, should they're like, what's a better occupation if you think about it for someone like this. Is there anything else I remember from Mr. Carnine that might exhaust it for the time being? Oh, he did, yeah. And in the same vein, he played once a song that was recorded on a cassette by a classmate of mine who would later become a very good friend, Sean Fryer. And I remember that, and that was like my introduction to Sean Fryer. He played a piano, who's gone on to become like a PhD, very highly awarded composer. He played a performance of his on the piano of Goodness Gracious, Great Balls of Fire, which was very impressive. That's Mr. Carnine, 6th grade, language arts. There was that elective teacher I told you about, who's obviously a fag hag of sorts. I liked her a lot too. I don't remember what the elective class was because it wasn't elected by me. It wasn't, I don't know why they called it an elective. It was more like an obligatory. I don't remember what it was, but it was not some goofy thing, kind of like off, whatever. There were other very traditional things about the school that were old school. I remember one teacher randomly saying that our permission slips for field trips, I can't remember a single field trip we took, but she was saying like they haven't changed since the 1940s, and other things hadn't changed since the 1940s. The principal looked like he was straight out of the 1940s. His name was Mr. Gaydowski. That's how it's spelled, and of course made fun of as, but Godowski is what we would call him. And he was like, straight out of Central Casting, old school principal. I mean, and he was like, think Kevin Spacey as a middle school principal from the 40s, and you've got it. Minus the gay part, probably. Who knows? Maybe, I don't know. And his office, I'll never forget it. His office smelled like the inside of an empty coffee cup. You know what I mean? The coffee, like inside of it smelled like that all the time. It was powerful. It was emanating from there. Trying not to scare some of the kids who are still here for some reason. Mr. Godowski, old school. We had a vice principal, Mr. Chernow, who looked like Mr. Clean. I talked about Mr. Chernow in the Dancers from the Dance episode. He was just this iconic figure and image. And he would cover up his like Toyota. He had like one of those 2-door Toyotas, that sports cars that isn't expensive, but it is a cheap way of being like a badass or whatever. And he would cover it up every single day on the parking lot in front of the campus. He would put a cover over it because I guess he was afraid of shenanigans being visited upon it. It was a dark blue color, I recall. And, you expect if there's cars covered up, you expect once the covers are lifted that there's a fucking Porsche in there or something. But no, it was a Toyota. But so he was very proud of that car. And I actually was sent to his office at the very end of my tenure here in 8th grade. And it wasn't I don't recall it being for disciplinary reasons. I think it was for some technical bullshit. that I needed to transfer over to credits, to make sure credits were counted for certain high school classes that I was planning to take the next year in 9th grade. Whatever it was, I was in his office when who should walk in but Anna Nicole Smith with her son, whom she was enrolling into the school. And that was one out of 2 celebrity sightings that occurred here. The other being, well, classmate Emil Hirsch. Mostly Garin's friend and classmate, but I think we were in the same P class at some point, and he went here. I didn't know him. I didn't really interact with him. Trash digger. Yeah, that's me, all right. Going to the... You know who else is a trash digger? David Lynch! You remember that story, right? You remember David Lynch, your hero now, all you Topanga kids, because he's popular, because he's an accepted popular thing. Your hero, he was also a trash digger. He dug into the trash at Bob's Big Boy and found that box of chocolate shake powder or whatever the fuck, and he read the ingredients. Remember that? He dug into the trash. Remember that? And he digs into the trash again on Mulholland Drive for that icon. You remember that? Yeah, I'm a trash digger.
A hurry of hoofs in a village street. A shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark. And beneath from the pebbles, in passing, a spark struck out by a steed that flies fearless and fleet. That was all. And yet, through the gloom and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night. And the spark struck out by that steed in his flight kindled the land into flame with its heat.
It covers it for 6th grade. And in 7th grade, well, 7th grade is when my sports card business really started in earnest. And so that was a big spring in my step. I mean, not only because I was making dough here, enough to live comfortably, as they say, you know, popcorn-wise, candy-wise, Fruitopia-wise, but also it was an obsession that was overtaking me in off-camera. It was my whole life. You know, I get obsessed about things. When I get an interest in something, I go all the way. And I go as deep as I can go, and I went as deep as I could go into the sports card business, and that gave me, and that was important because there were huge family crises happening that time. 2 of them at the same time, one of which was my mom and dad ceasing to speak to each other and becoming very cold and nasty to each other. And, you know, it was good to have some alternative things going on. And to be in that process of transformation, even though I didn't know it at the time. Because at the time, I still held on to the hope that I could at least, you know, this was being modified at this point to, you know, getting a scholarship to play at UCLA. That would have been my, you know, forget the MBA, I'm not going to be good enough, okay, fine. But to play at UCLA, that's the real dream. So I was adjusting already a little bit, but still, pie in the sky. So I wasn't, you know, so long as that remained a conscious dream or a acknowledged dream or an official dream, it was going to be hard for me to track just how much I was changing and in what way. I was not reflective enough to do that at the time. But it was happening, and it was good that it was happening, because God knows what else might have happened, you know. It was happening, however weird and painful it was, and strange, and disappointing. I mean, the other, you know, well, I'll get to that in a second. 7th grade also marked, there was a teacher in 7th grade that I liked. Is the only one I really care about, well, there's 2, actually, I shouldn't discount. One was Miss Winograd. Mrs. Winograd, who would later run for Congress as a Democrat, and I would see her commercial. she was the English teacher, and she was like this very, God, what to compare her to? She was an old school character cat. She was like an old hippie, artsy hippie. She's like Marianne Williamson. Think Marianne Williamson. But more Jewish, I think. Well, no, wait, they're both Jewish. Marianne Williamson's Jewish too. All right, so think Marianne Williamson, but more literary than spiritual. Okay, let's just say more Hollywood. And I remember, she was very encouraging. She had a certain hippie woo-woo appeal to her. She had a maternal, that's a thing, that's real. But we didn't, there was something that separated us. I didn't get close to her affections the way I did with Mrs. Pottishman from 4th grade. It could have happened, but it didn't for some reason. And I think that reason is fairly obvious, and it would turn out. But I wouldn't know it at the time. At the time, that distance would feel, more, what's the word I'm looking for? Opprobrious, whatever. It felt like there was a little bit of, and partly it was because I wasn't a great student. I never was a great student, so I'm sure there were some sloppy things that justified it, but there was a lack. I felt like there was a lack of warmth after an initial opening of warmth, in which I thought she was the bee's knees for a second. I remember her telling us to buy. Well, she has one of the required books that she had chosen was something called Making Shapely Fiction. This cute little mass market paperback, colorful. I still have it. And she made us go buy it at Palisades Village Bookstore. And that was my first time at Village Books, which even before the fires had been turned, already closed and turned into the Caruso Mall that's there and survived the fires, but it was already gone. So that was my first time in an indie bookstore that I recall that wasn't Brentano's. So she wrote 3 episodes of Doug. I don't know if I mentioned that already. I forget which ones. Doug's Shoes, one of them. That's what I remember. And she was like, there was something separating us, and it's because I was undergoing that transformation I mentioned earlier. Something was happening. But there was a teacher that I had absolute warmth with, and was a bro, an older bro. Rob Perez, my history teacher. I wasn't especially good at history, although there was one time, for some reason, we were doing like trivia some sort of trivia sort of bit for a while, which, it's always great for students. It's always anything semi-competitive and like a game show is much better than anything homework related. So like every Friday or something, there would be like a trivia thing where he would start asking us, divide the class into teams and ask trivia questions with varying degrees of difficulty, and then and then assign points. I don't remember if there was any prize. No, this wasn't Miss Petrick's. But whatever, it was fine. And I just remember one of those questions, a 5-point question, 5-alarm difficulty question. And the question was, why did President Ronald Reagan change Thanksgiving from the last Thursday of November to the 4th Thursday of November? But Mr. President, there are only 4 month weeks in a month. No, sometimes there are 5 Thursdays in a month. And then the question was open, and my hand never shot up so confidently in my entire life. It wasn't like, oh, call me type of thing. No, it wasn't that. It was the sense that I had arrived at a somewhat, by pure intuitive logic, I had arrived at an answer. It wasn't something I knew already in the back of my pocket. I hadn't heard of that had ever happened. I just put two and two together, made a logical deduction in my head, and raised my hand using all the lived experience I had accrued as a capitalist in the sports card trade. And I said, you know the answer. So there can be more shopping days between Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's correct, Mr. Perez said. So Mr. Perez was blonde, kind of looks like a beach boy a little, not a beach boy, but looks like a beach kid a little bit. Very blonde, short hair, a little bit on the chunky side, good looking guy. He was from Santa Barbara, I believe. His dad still lived there. And he was married, young married, didn't have kids yet. He was a huge UCLA fan, as was I. And we bonded over that big time. He would go to all the games with his dad. I'd go to all the games with his dad. So we bonded over sports big time. And even though he was kind of he tried to maintain the kind of tough attitude to the students, familiar but also tough, exactly like a big brother who's kind of always teasing you and making demands, but also is cool. And I liked him a lot, and we had many, and he was just someone that I could talk to about all the things I was going through as a suffering but sometimes exultant, but often confused and defeated Bruin fan. Little kids are still playing here in the sports area, which I should probably come to in a few more minutes. I like Mr. Perez. Anyway, he was he was one out of these. He was somebody else in the general realm of Leonard Owens, who I was forming these mentor relationships with that I don't think exist anymore, because you're not allowed to do that anymore, because what if right? Are coaches and teachers in their late 20s allowed to form mentorships with 6th and 7th grade boys kind of off the clock anymore? Is that a thing anymore? There were multiple cases of that in these years. One of them was in the sports card business off campus, and I'll get into that another time, but it was in the same vein. One of the top dealers in America took me under his wing, the guy who owned the card shop on Westwood, on Gailey in Westwood. And, he was in his mid-30s. These were guys who all took me under their wing. And then, of course, there was the great Santini Leonard Owens as this kind of its own separate authority, the chief of them all. There's Mr. Perez, and then there was someone else too, and also named Rob. He was this 19-year-old MTV hot-looking soccer playing guy who was the coach of my AYSO soccer team. For reasons I still don't understand, and maybe it had to do with community service, because he was always getting in trouble from partying too much and fucking girls too much. And he got kicked out of UCSB for partying too much. He got kicked off the team. And so at 19, probably as part of community service, I don't know, he became the coach at AYSO, and it was under him that I underwent another transformation from someone whose life is all about basketball to someone whose, at least his playing life as an athlete, is all about being a goalie in soccer. And that would end up being the sport I played in varsity to some success in high school. That's a transformation that occurred here. From aspiring hoopster with a good jump shot, but weak handles for a man his size. Good defender, though, but again, without those handles, you can't get anywhere very far. No matter how respected your jump shot is in the Compton community. I went from that to being a goalkeeper. I applied my basketball skills, mainly the defensive ones, and it translated very well, and so I transformed into a goalkeeper here over the course of it, and I became really tight with my AYSO coach, Rob. No homo, obviously. It was just, again, he liked me and I liked him. We joked, we laughed, we became equally, we were seen as politically incorrect pariahs in the very, that stereotypical AYSO, participation trophy culture. He ended up coaching the all-star team. I made the all-star team for the first time in any sport. And I was the star goalie on the all-star team, but then there were all these little political games that would be played where kids were left out of, the better players were left out of certain tournaments so that other players would get a chance, and we would go get livid at this shit. We would be so mutually enraged. Often our mutual rage would be visited upon referees, and then we'd get red cards and sit out together, side by side, kicked out of the game. That happened once. All the way up in Santa Barbara. Anyway, he was another one of these men. There were these like older male, but not that old, big brother type of mentor figures, young mentor figures that I came across here. I can count 4 total. And there's probably more if I think about it. Yeah, and so whatever. In Winograd's class, I just remember I had a brief success, where everyone thought I was funny before they forgot again later. There was a poem I wrote a poem called "Oh Mamacita," and I read it out, and that the way I just did right now, like the refrain was "Oh Mamacita, oh Mamacita." It was like a romantic poem, And every time I said "Oh Mamacita," they just burst out laughing. I mean, I really had them by the gonads with "Oh Mamacita," I gotta tell you. For a brief moment there, I had the lungs of the world, my world anyway, with that "Oh Mamacita" poem on it. Original, genuine original. I'm sure it was great. So that happened in Winograd's class. But something kept us apart. I don't know. And I keep coming back to, of course, Leonard Owens and the basketball team. This was the defining school experience. He was the defining teacher, mentor, whatever. He's the one that I wanted to impress. And I wrote my high school essay about him, my college essay, the essay, my college application essay. Since he's black, obviously, I thought, well, I've got, hey, I don't have to write a total bullshit essay. I can write a true essay, one that's honest, even though it's probably going to guarantee that I get in nowhere, because it was all about him, and it was all about what I learned from him. And it was 100% genuine. And when I didn't get into UCLA from high school, but then reapplied to transfer from UC Santa Barbara 2 years later, and didn't care if I got in anymore. I was over it. I was, offended. I didn't give a shit. So I sent in for my college transfer application, I sent in that same essay. Unedited. The same fucking essay. I said, I'm not going to give a shit. And I didn't have a great GPA either. And yet somehow I got in that time. Where was I? I wrote my essay about, some people are getting into a fight. I don't want to get. Teacher just got mad and yelled at someone. I wonder if it was a fellow teacher. Ooh, drama. I think these two hate each other. Yeah, there's a guy and a woman teacher who hate each other. He called her a liar. Trauma in the school. That was always big when teachers hated each other.
It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Compton Town. He heard the bleating of the flock and the twitter of birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadows brown. And one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British basketball.
A cute-looking gym, too, from the outside. And there is a Volkswagen Bug-looking Fiat right here, but it's orange, and it's new. I'm walking out into the outdoor courts now where the PE classes would take place. I was a very sensitive child, as many are. Maybe perhaps as most are. Maybe even all are. Until, at very different points in their lives, some of them get smacked around. I was a sensitive child, and I was too sensitive, way too sensitive, to handle the indifferences and cruelties of the real world. I was definitely raised, in a mildly sheltered, but sheltered way. Much, much, much more sheltered than my parents were by a long shot, and as most people were in the olden days. But I was definitely in the sheltered category, and I was sensitive, and I needed someone to teach me that the world does not care about your feelings, especially if you're a white boy, or any boy. Frankly, any boy. The world does not care about your feelings. Probably at the time, actually, the proper way to put it would have been, even if you're a white boy. Because if you're a white boy, you are more likely to have that sheltered atmosphere that shields you from reality and creates all kinds of very soft spots around your consciousness. And I learned good and fast that that's not reality. And it probably helped that Coach was, somebody who looked to the part. In other words, he looked like an expert on basketball, if you know what I mean. And so he was someone that I could get brutality from in a way that I respected, and also was, it wasn't like my dad yelling at me. His eyes would go wide anytime a young woman showed up, like Connect's mom, for example. Oh my God. There's one time Connect's mom showed up, wearing short shorts and it was like a Looney Tunes cartoon where the eyes pop out of their sockets and go wiggling, and then the jaw drops and goes. It was like insane how he just stared her down the entire time she walked in, and walked out with Connect the communist, as she relieved us of the presence of communist belief. Wow, were his eyes popping out. So he was really into the ladies, just so you know. I remember I would call him. He gave me his number because another thing he would do, and this is what it was. He would be chronically late or never even showing up to our games. And that was just, and it was always some car issue, it was always some this and that, just him being a no-show was a chronic problem, and it created it created an entire symphony of suspense about whether he would be there that time, and it was always such a relief when he was, that whole thing. And so this drove the parents crazy, obviously, and made it this gave people the excuse to quit his endless no-shows and inconsistency in terms of showing up to games. Everything on campus was consistent, but the showing up to games, which all of them were in Compton, Inglewood, the inner city, so South Central. So I got to see a good old slice of those places. All of our games were exclusively in that neighborhood because he had us in a league that was only those kinds of schools for some reason. Maybe I don't know what it was. There was some reason why we were only playing them. I mean, partly is we were all LAUSD public schools, and you're limited to that pool. So we were playing at John Muir and Martin Luther King, and we would practice at Dorsey, and I forget the other ones. I mean, there were some real. I think there was Booker T. Washington School too. Thankfully, no Ta-Nehisi Coates School yet. Still waiting on Stacey Abrams Middle School. But I hope there's at least an Omarosa. So we would play in those schools. He would be a no-show all the time. I had his phone number, and I would call him sometimes, and we would have conversations about sports, I'm guessing. And like as I had with many people in those days, one of the things I did, I was basically calling, there's a goat right here. Let me take a picture of this goat. Huh. The goat school. Cutie too. It's a billy goat. Hey, do you mind if I take a picture with you? Oh, there's more goats. Good goat. Oh, there's another goat here. Let's get you both in the shot. Cuties. There's a third goat in the back with different horns. You guys are so cute. That was a nice surprise. 3 wise goats. You're a cutie. You're looking straight at me, aren't you? Blue-eyed Billy boy. What a charming creature you are. What's your name? I wonder. Don't shave. Where was I? Anyway, I talked to him on the phone as I talked to all my customers on the phone who would call in their orders. I was a mail order business mostly. So it was a lot of talking on the phone after work hours, because I'd get home after 3, sometimes 4. And on Wednesdays, my mom would pick me up and we'd drive the endless 2.5-hour drive all the way to City of Industry for the card show that I had a table at, would sell from, and trade and buy and whatever. Every Wednesday for 2 hours while we listened nonstop to Leonard Cohen's The Future album on CD in her car until it was all destroyed. We listened to the shit out of that album, with songs like Democracy is Coming to the USA and Waiting for the Miracle. I talked to him. Oftentimes I would call and he wouldn't pick up, and it would be some woman. Oh, but was it the voice of a woman? It was the resigned voice of a black woman, straight out of like a 1940s play. It was exquisite. There was a woman you could just, it was the type of voice there was a type of voice that Etta James is doing so well in her version of It's All Right. I know you love another man, but it's all right. Sometimes I wonder who'll be loving you tonight. And I would talk to her sometimes, and she would just very warmly tell me that, oh, Leonard's not home. He was bowling. He was really into bowling. He was a very competitive and passionate bowler. So often he was out bowling. He's bowling. I'll tell him you call. She was just the sweetest voice. So he had a woman at home. Good old Leonard Owens. U.N. Owens. As he was on so many an afternoon. But I mentioned at the end of my first live show in L.A., Reverie Under the Stars, Los Angeles, I ended the show with a little tribute to Leonard Owens. If you're there, maybe you remember it. And I think that little tribute defines what it is that he taught me.
Were you good at basketball?
I was on the basketball team, and I'm glad you asked that because there's one more person I want to pay tribute to, and it's a sign that there's a fucking basketball hoop at this last second venue that I need to pay tribute to him. The bottom line is, as you could tell from my history, like being a child of divorce, shit like that, if I went to a private school, I would have been a pussy. I would have been a real pussy. I had to have the pussy beat out of me. I had to have the pussy fucked out of me. And my middle school basketball coach is the one who fucked it out of me. He fucked the pussy right out of me. Truthfully, though, so when I wrote my college essay about my middle school basketball coach who,
molested you.
No, he didn't. It sounded like he did because of the way I'm talking about it. But he didn't he did, but not literally. He molested me with words. He used all the words. He was from Compton. He was the janitor at the school. He was black. He drove to school and...
He definitely molested you.
Sorry? What?
Definitely molested.
He did not molest me. He did not molest me. And don't think that I would have necessarily minded, but he did not molest me. He simply wanted me to play with more fundamentals. He simply wanted me to play smart and not be a retard and not be a pussy. He is the one who taught me how to be a man. Leonard Owens, and I've always wanted to find him.
For me, that just further proves that Armenians are not white.
He's the one who told me that you don't be a bloop, be a black man.
Be the N-word.
But he also told me to be a little bit of a bloop too. Don't let them censor the bloop out of you completely. So anyway, I've never seen him since I graduated, but I've always dreamed that one day on some concocted evening I would run into him again on one of these adventures and I would be able to thank him.
Have a passionate sexual affair.
No, not have a passionate sexual affair. Simply thank him for making me the nigger I am today.
And it was that definition, it was that lesson more than any other single thing that completed, I think, the transformation that occurred during these years. That was the important one. That was the big one. That was the big skill. Huge one. Some would call it a pill, and some would paint that pill if they had the acumen in assigning color that I had back in the day. Some might even paint that pill red. What better color for such a pill? Connect would paint it. I would tell him to paint it red. And that was a big one. It was an acceptance of reality that forced, even an excessive one, because the fact is that even in those days, technically speaking, the way that the hard-ass way, the comically hard-ass way that he would communicate was much more the way of an older player on the team than of an actual coach concerned with getting the most out of his players. He was himself. He was just being his own personality. And he was still kind of lording it over the lesser players around him. Or admiring with a certain kind of invincible purity the ones he admired, such as Dylan. There was something about Dylan, as I keep saying. And when we asked him, how come you never, at some point we asked him, how come you never, ever yell at Dylan? And he said his reason was that, well, Dylan's always trying very hard. He's always playing with maximal effort. And this was bullshit. Don't expect me to cement that coinage, because that was bullshit. It's true that that's what Dylan was doing. He was always playing hard, and he was always, but so were others. Everyone. I was playing hard. I was always trying my heart out to impress this motherfucker. And I wasn't the only one. People were playing hard. Not everyone, but we were playing people. That was a bullshit reason. Matter of fact, one of the most memorable lessons Leonard Owens taught me is that effort is meaningless if you're going in the wrong direction. Labor theory of value debunked once again. He literally once told Obi, when he went to hustle, he hustled and dove and threw a ball, dove to save a ball that was going out of bounds, and threw it back into the court, as you're taught to do by the conventional standards of hustle. The heroic running into the court and throwing the ball in, saving the ball from going out of bounds, and then like barreling into the stands. And Owens tore him a new one when he did that. He said, never throw the ball back in like that if you don't know that you're throwing it to your team, because you're going to be outnumbered. You're throwing it in, the other team gets it, you're out of the play because you're rolling around on the ground, and you've just given them a fast break. So never save the ball unless you know who you're saving it to. And at another time he made fun of him for hustling, and he said, it's even worse if you hustle in the wrong direction. And this made all the more acute by the fact that my favorite team, UCLA, was then being coached by a fun-loving, nice guy, loosey-goosey, anything goes, Steve Lavin, who was a disaster. So no, it wasn't because he tried hard all the time. There was another deeper form of respect that he had for Dylan, from a player to a player. There was something there. And again, in the professional world of political sensitivity, you'd be like, well, you don't want to show favoritism to the players. That's not good. Doesn't matter. It was a pure reaction. People simply or let's just say, that there are people that we have a soft spot for. In reality, this is what reality is like. Like, there's always some people that we're more forgiving to, and even completely forgiving to, that we never, no matter how bitchy we may be to the average person in our lives, someone we always let off the hook. Always. Maybe two people. That's a thing that happens in reality. It's not fair. And it shouldn't be. Because if it were fair, then it would suppress that very human that very human reaction that it is to like somebody for some mostly ineffable reason. Because again, it's not that he was the best player. It's not that he's just being to the best. If it was like that, that's bullshit. It was something else. It was something much more personal. that was what he was ultimately. He was like the others, an older brother that I mentioned. He was that kind of teacher. He wasn't the masterful, he wasn't your fucking genius, masterful coach. He knew his shit, so he commanded authority, but he was still in his soul and his heart, much like Rob, the soccer player, and perhaps even Rob, the history teacher, then only 27. He was much more the older brother. Still kind of wanting to tease you with how much he knows, but I always dreamed of running into him again, so that I could brag about my accomplishments and give him the credit and thank him. And I still do, if he's around. If anybody knows Leonard Owens with a bullet hole in his 68 bug windshield, let me know. It would be very interesting to hear what he remembers of those days. He's probably dead, but you know what I mean. And I was aware that he taught me that. It gave me a confidence and it gave me a thick skin that I absolutely needed, and without which I couldn't have done probably anything I went on to do in the realm of the precocious and unusual, in terms of radicalizing into a figure of bombast and polemics and controversy and all that shit that would happen in high school and beyond. Without this knowledge, without this message that I got here. And there were other things too that began here. They would blossom later, but they began right here, where I'm standing right now, on the basketball courts, outside, just north of the gym, and just south of Sunset Boulevard. Actually, Sunset Boulevard runs right around it. Curves right around it, I think. Yeah, curves right around it. So I'm being hugged right now by Sunset Boulevard, where I stand, and where we both were being hugged by Sunset Boulevard, around the shoulder, like a big brother does, when Godin and I, my close friend to this day, best friend, met here in the PE class of the man who welcomed me when I got here earlier, but unfortunately the recorder wasn't working, Mr. Koritz, our PE teacher, who is now an assistant principal here, and who I had a very nice interaction with when I arrived here earlier. And surprising one. And he doesn't look a day older. We were in his class, and I met Godin, and we became fast friends, slow friends, I don't know. But by the end of our time here, we were friends. We were friends. Some would call us Armenian friends. And we didn't just become friends here. We also became collaborators here of a kind. And especially of the missionary kind, intellectual kind. Not the missionary position kind, but the other kind. The messianic kind. There's another name. There's a certain, almost one could say, the Paul Revere kind. Here, on this court, is where it began. And it was cemented when a controversy arose around the content of his graduation speech. Godin was a very good student, and he was always in leadership class and all that stuff. And he had been selected to give, not the valedictorian speech, that's always an Asian girl, but what he was giving a speech out of leadership class. He was going to be giving one of the speeches, as well he ought to have been, as that is his, that's in his bones and in his family line. And I don't know if I want to get into it too specifically, but because it almost minimizes it to tell you what specifically the issue was. that the controversy arose over. I don't know if I want to get into it, but it was about the content of his speech and whether or not at some point, list of minorities to be mentioned would only include Jews, whites and blacks and Latinos, or whatever. Jews, blacks, and Latinos were like the three. Or Asians, Jews, blacks, and Latinos, and then Guy wanted to add a few more in there. As I recall the controversy being. It was over something very, now trivial, completely trivial, and of something very much of its particular time. And one way or the other, whatever the exact wording was, they didn't want him to use. The ruling was he was forbidden. He was to not use the longer version with the more ethnicities. He was supposed to just say the approved ethnicities of the time. And our memory of this is not precisely aligned, but more or less, my conviction, at least my final conviction, whatever else might be remembered, was that he should just say it anyway. Just say the fucking speech as you want, as it should be said. I felt very strong about it, and I felt very defiant about it. Not that it was my ass on the line, but he was somewhat concerned about his ass being on the line and being punished. Not that they could do anything in 8th grade, but there was a lot of paranoia about getting into college those years. It was like all we were raised on. If you're a millennial my age, a first millennial, even beyond, you were just raised on this religion of getting into college. It was so consuming to our generation. It's all we knew. If you were in any way, if you were at all kind of like a behaved person, and man, it was narrow. But it's what it was. It's better than nothing, I guess. It was a grade grubber generation, for fuck's sake. That's why fucking Daily Show and all this bullshit began. But anyway, that's a later point. The point is that there was a battle here. There was a battle here against the crown, and there was to be a rebellion against that crown. It was to be a rebellion was fomented, and a stand was taken, regardless of the importance of the details. A stand was taken for something. And it happened here. It happened here before we graduated, and before a good time before, it would be quite obvious what that was the beginning of. A good time before.
So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm to every middle school village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear. A voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For born on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear.
I forget the date exactly. It was a Friday. It was about 10 days into the fires last year, when it looked like the winds were going to blow in this direction. They were blowing in this direction, and it looked like the flames were going to make their way east and toward Brentwood and take out Mandeville Canyon and everything around here. It looked like that was going to happen. And that was exactly the point, that Friday, that night, where a combination of the winds changing and the LA Fire Department finally getting their shit together, finally getting up in arms, finally figuring it out, and launching a real defense of the fire, defense against the fire, that's when it all clicked. Somehow or another, this part was spared. And then also anything else was further spread was also spared from that point on. From the point it was deflected here is when it finally started. The fire started to retreat, and we, the City of Angels, started shooting at the right fucking basket. And so, thankfully, I don't have to say that any of this school, this campus, or this particular circle, this particular curve in Sunset Boulevard is gone. It is here. It is here. And it's good to know that it is here. It's good to know that it is here. Because this, after all, loud and clear, is where I received the message of Paul Revere.
Well, the sweet pretty things are in bed now, of course. City fathers, they're trying to endorse the reincarnation of Paul Revere's horse. But the town has no need to be nervous.
Oh, yes, they do, Bob. Oh, yes, they do.
This episode of Filthy Armenian Adventures was recorded live at Paul Revere Middle School between Sunset Boulevard and Allenford Drive on the border of Pacific Palisades, California on January 26, 2026. On January 27, President Donald Trump signed an executive order for the federal government to take over the wildfire rebuild, preempting the, quote, nightmare of delays and bureaucratic malaise, which has granted only 15% of the victims permits after 1 year. The poem excerpted throughout this episode is Paul Revere's Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. This episode was made possible entirely by the Patriots, Town Criers, and Midnight Riders who subscribe to the show on Patreon to join their elite society and gain access to twice as many adventures plus other special messages. Subscribe to the show at patreon.com/filthyarmenian. Patreon.com/filthyarmenian. The Palisades Lost Tour will continue in the coming weeks. Thank you for listening. Spread the word and keep your eye on the belfry.